Start with a little background. I'm not a typical academic. I spent 15 years at General Motors and then 5 years at Schlumberger, 5 years at Beatrice, 15 years at Sara Lee Corporation, consulted a little bit, so you can tell I'm old. And you can also tell that I couldn't hold a job. I went from industry to industry. So I was ideally suited for academia. And I do recommend it for all of you, but I'll warn you, you'll work 24/7, right? Academics work 24/7? 24 hours a week, 7 months of the year. Okay, this is my second stint in academia. First time I was at the University of Chicago as an adjunct. And this was in 2000. And you probably noticed there was an evaluation form for this conference, right? And if any of you ever went to school, you probably remember the experience of evaluating your professors, right? Okay, my very first class, 12 weeks have passed, and on the 13th week, the class is over, and I collect the evaluation forms. And I look at the first one, and I read, if I had but 30 minutes to live, I'd like to spend them in Professor Sandor's class. Can you imagine how excited I was? So I took these appraisals right in, and I showed Dean Epp, and I said, look at that. Well, I failed to notice that there was an asterisk. And the asterisk said, please turn over. And Dean Epp turned it over and read back to me, because those 30 minutes would seem like an eternity. Now, I tell that story because I want to engage a dialogue as opposed to just talking to you for 30 minutes. So, my topic is on talent. And I'm a professor at Michigan State University. Michigan State University is routinely ranked the #1 school in supply chain management. Occasionally, MIT will be #1 for the full-time MBA portion, but you know, that's a minor slip. And we've been at it for a long time, and there's a lot of schools that I could put on that list that I haven't. Places like Miami and Bowling Green and Florida State and North Carolina State. And the interesting thing is, as I look at this room, we have some old people, some middle-aged people, and some young people. The old people will remember that 30, 40 years ago, this was not a subject routinely taught in universities. And so it was very easy for Michigan State to be the #1 school in the space when there was only 2 or 3 schools in the space. So they were a big fish in a small pond for some time. But over the last 10 years in particular, the number of schools offering degrees or at least concentrations in supply chain management has more than increased tenfold. There's now something like 500. That's something. When you consider not long ago there were hardly any. Now the question I have of you, and by show of hands, how many of you, you're all in supply management or purchasing, right? How many of you have degrees in supply management or purchasing or supply chain? Okay, that's more than I normally get. It's probably about 10%. Now, if you were a group of engineers or a group of finance people or a group of marketing people or a group of lawyers, and I asked you how many had degrees in the pertinent fields, all the hands would go up, right? You wouldn't hire a lawyer who didn't have a law degree, an accountant who didn't have finance, an engineer that didn't take engineering courses, right? But here we have a profession that is responsible for 60 to 80% of the cost of goods sold of the company, where we don't even require that the body of knowledge that purportedly serves that profession is represented in the education of the people that are there. Now that's changing. More and more firms are beginning to hire people with supply chain management degrees and make them part of a rotational program. Now where I think we're heading is where I've got Michigan State prominent in the S, showing the intersection of 3 functions. The first is sourcing or procurement, the second is logistics, the third is operations management. Now, I've shown some of the schools where they have strengths or where they're noted, but I think we need to teach supply management as an integrated function. There is a lot in the operations management literature and space. There's a lot about lean development. There's a lot about order quantities. There's a lot about functional flows and all the engineering, all that stuff. And it really doesn't matter if the operations literature applies to your own four walls or your supplier's four walls, correct? So that is a consistent body of knowledge that can be spread. Logistics as well. There was a time, believe it or not, when we used to run our own logistics. We had our own trucks, our own warehouses, right? I vaguely remember that. I'm looking at old people. Now it almost never happens, right? Nobody's older than me, so I can say that. With the exception of Walmart, everybody outsources their logistics. So again, that's a purchase goods and services. And of course, procurement of all those things. So my advice is not to treat them as separate disciplines, but to rather consider it an integrated function. Now, if we're going to teach it that way, it would be kind of nice if you all act that way. At your organizations, do you break operations, break logistics, and break sourcing as three different functions, reporting to different people, potentially reporting to different people? Fix that. You're all part of one function. So the body of knowledge says that anything that is outside your manufacturing competence or your service delivery competence is a purchase goods or service. That could be legal, that could be IT, that could be manufacturing, that could be anything that money is spent to somebody who is not a badge holder of your corporation. And that is a wide range of functions. We're at the indirect conference, right? You know, for some firms, indirect's bigger than direct, right? Most people miss that. There are only a handful of companies that really capture all the indirect spend. By and large, we're happy if we get such a percentage. And we keep working to get more and more and to gain credibility. My thesis is we'll have credibility when we understand that there's a body of knowledge and we teach it and it covers these three areas and we recruit heavily against it. Now, as you're bringing in incoming people into the field, are you now looking for degrees in supply chain? Is that where you're recruiting? That's what we're seeing happening. The proliferation of these degrees in other universities, the number of candidates that are now being produced in the United States and Western Europe primarily has increased dramatically. But you know, we're not keeping up with you. Your demand for our product, students, is growing exponentially. And it's pretty obvious why that's happening. Because we used to make things, now we buy them, right? There's a growing trend, despite what you've heard about insourcing, there's still a growing trend. It's been going on for 40 years. You will spend more with outsiders than you're going to spend internally. Anybody see that trend bucking? I rarely do. Okay, good. Yeah, maybe it's coming back a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You know, the debate is, well, there's offshore or we reshoring it. Well, even when we reshore it, we rarely reshore it into our factory. We just reshore it to a supplier closer to us than they were previous, right? So the idea that there's a body of knowledge around these three previously disparate academic functions will drive the recognition that you are probably the most important function in a corporation because nobody else controls as much as both the potential revenue and the profitability of a firm. Believe that? Okay. Everybody in the room believes that, right? And if I talk to a group of procurement people, they say, of course that's true. You talk to a group of engineers or CFOs or CEOs, they look at you like you're daft. How could you possibly think those ignorant people down there in the dungeon could be important? It's changing, though. Okay, where do we see the talent expectations? And this is where we're building curriculum. And I don't think you would have seen these 4 bubbles even 5 years ago. Certainly not 10 or 20 years ago. The bubbles represent what we've done in terms of, we called it Vision 2020, where in collaboration with Darden and IMD, we've done a series of benchmarking studies with industry leaders, with academics, with consultants, and we said, what are the principal areas where supply chain practitioners have to have expertise going forward? And those 4 areas are managing complexity, which is risk mitigation, which is you're going to send out the presentation, aren't you? Okay, so if you want to take notes, you can, but we'll send it to you. Students don't take notes anymore. They expect to have everything given to them. But complexity is everything. Complexity is risk mitigation, it's product proliferation, it's all sorts of things around the definition. It's the part of the iceberg that's underwater. Integration is both inside and outside, gaining alignment. Leveraging volume, which is something we've always done, but expertise, which is something we need to do. And then developing the appropriate supply chain analytics. Now we're starting to call that big data, right? And IBM and others are offering solutions where they're combining massive data sets to do what they're calling predictive analytics with robust algorithms, right? We used to call that regression analysis, but it sounds a whole lot better. But we have just loads and loads of data, and we ought to be able to do more things with them than we did previously, right? Okay. Where is that most appropriate? Within your 4 walls? In the accounting function? In the engineering function? Huh. In the supply function. That's where the risks exist. That's where the opportunities exist. So having those kind of analytical skills in supply chain will be unique. So we built this house and said, this is the vision you need to have. You have to have cost discipline. And by that, we're essentially meaning understanding of the target costs, the should costs, the market costs. Now, we've heard an initial presentation talking about the importance of negotiation from Bill at Cox. We just had a guy talk about negotiation. We believe negotiation's critical. I'm here to tell you, you only negotiate when you don't know. If you have total cost knowledge, you almost preclude the need to have a negotiation. I don't have to look for your eye twitching. I know it's exactly this much, all right? That's the direction we want to move. We'll obviously continue to have to negotiate, but it should be less emphasized. More emphasis should be put on developing superior cost knowledge. We have to collaborate inside and out. We have to be innovative, developing continuous improvements, and we got to be aligned. I've got one acronym for you, and I'm not showing it here because I'm going to ask you to remember it, and you're not going to have any other reference to it. I'm telling you, your job, the reason you exist, is to do one thing for the firm. It is to earn preferential treatment. Now, if you define any activity in supply as the ability to earn preferential treatment, you will be in a position to deliver sustainable competitive advantage. Sustainable over time, competitive better than the alternatives, advantage, you are better positioned than your competitors. So that's the objective. And the only contribution I've made to academia is inventing that term. EPT. I kept repeating it. About 15 years ago at Hewlett-Packard, after 2 days of saying it, I asked the group what the EPT stands for, and just a bunch of blank faces. One young woman said, early pregnancy testing. Okay, this is your job. You have to earn preferential treatment from suppliers, period. Now, how can you do that? There's multiple ways. But I'm going to suggest that the best way is to develop people that have career path skills and expectations that give them rounded opportunities. And it might look something like this. You have entry level, staff level, advisors, senior advisors, consultants. They can be in demand planning, they can be in logistics, they can be in manufacturing, they can be in purchasing, and global procurement. And at the end of that journey, it's called supply management. They may also have spent some time in accounting, in finance, in marketing, in engineering. They need to be cross-functional. It's nice if they speak multiple languages, and they should have global experience. The two words I'm saying more often than not in business lexicon are global and strategic. And when we combine global and strategic, we begin to salivate. Isn't that right? That's the goal. That's the ultimate end game. And your end game is to create leaders. When I was growing up, our job was to create competent managers. We'd divide ourselves into commodities, and we'd have a competent manager for each commodity. We'd try to move them, but it was kind of hard because once you became the steel expert and he was a plastic expert, you know, it's hard to get you guys to switch because we'd lose all that skill. Now we're going to require that you rotate, and we're going to require that you make moves. Well, maybe I'm going to go that way. Oh, maybe I might go that way. Essentially, people will not go up one vertical. To succeed, you'll have to have multiple experiences. Now, the other way is you can be like me and, you know, just routinely get fired from different companies and you move around. But if you want a career that you're planning, plan, if you're young enough to follow something like this, or if you're responsible for your people, to make sure you rotate them through successive parts of the organization. Now, the next three, how much time do I have here? Okay, I'm doing okay. The next three slides come from a group we call the Executive Advisory Board. Now, at Michigan State, we have a board. There are 9 chief procurement officers. Cisco, Rolls-Royce, General Motors, Delphi. Oh, geez, I'm forgetting some. I got my notes, I got to check. Whirlpool, Goodyear, Kraft, Conagra. Okay, I couldn't forget them. So that's our Executive Advisory Board. And we asked them the question, what does it mean? Because everybody says, everywhere we go, that they recruit, they develop, and they retain people better than the other people. That's why they have such good people. And in fact, most places we go, I think people live in Lake Woebegone. You know what I mean by that? They're all much better than average. We tend to think that for some reason we're the most desirable place in the world to work. Suppliers would find us the most desirable customer to possibly have. We're just wonderful. Well, probably not. Everything is a histogram, you know, and there's tails, and most people live in the middle. But what we asked the AB to do, we said, define what it means to recruit, develop, and retain. And here's what they said. In order to recruit, you have to be perceived as being a world-class supply management organization. And you have to demonstrate to new hires and potential hires that you really deliver value to the enterprise. You're not simply cutting purchase orders. That you're not simply negotiating the lowest price. That you're actually driving innovation, you're driving revenue, you're driving process and product improvements that deliver to your firms sustainable competitive advantage. You got to have exemplary reputation, you have to be seen as the place to be, and you have to have rigorous people skills. Now, that really didn't describe procurement 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or probably in most places today, does it? But to be world-class, that's what you have to be. And our students are pretty picky. We have a career fair, and hundreds of companies come to recruit the students. they get multiple job offers. So how are you going to differentiate yourself? They've got to perceive that this is what you are. And they've got to perceive further that you will develop them, that you will have career paths. You'll set timelines. You'll make sure they're introduced to the proper people. You'll mentor them. People will become familiar with them. And you will also probably have a robust intern program. How many folks around here have intern programs? Okay, about half of the. How many times do you hire the intern? Just as a percent. 50? My two best examples are John Deere and Chevron. John Deere has, that's a big company, right? They got agricultural, they got forestry, they got construction, they got turf care, plants all over the place, sales, 20 billion or so. They have, every year, 90 interns. That's extraordinary. Almost all of those interns get job offers. Now, I don't know why everybody in the world doesn't want to live in Peoria, but you know, it's not exactly the greatest place on earth. So they have to attract folks to live in Peoria. And Peoria is one of the better places they have factories. But they do it by identifying that they have a process by which their people get developed that is extraordinary, and it is. And they also identify ongoing opportunities for these people to be educated. And I just so happen to have some brochures of a program that Deere participates in that I will leave on the front that I suggest your high pots participate in. This is I call it a matrix sort of program where it is 50% taught by academics and 50% taught by practitioners. The last one is how do you retain people? Again, this is the AB. They say you have to have everybody in your organization believe that there's a culture of excellence around supply management. You've got to get to the point where your people are routinely being stolen. You are doing such a good job that they're sought after by everybody, and that's going to happen. And you are aware of it, and you plan for it, and you force it into the organization. That's difficult for most people to comprehend. What it also suggests is that when you retain the right people, you've done it through a process that has driven some level of professionalism beyond what it would have been otherwise. I want to leave it at that. I can talk forever, but I really would like to get some feedback on what you regard as your strategies, your best strategies to attract and retain talent, and how that fits into university relations.